we bomb in 1 hour, stay out of our way. That was the message from a Russian general to US diplomats this week as Russian forces began bombing what they claimed were ISIL positions in Syria. So what's Vladimir Putin's game plan? And is he only inflaming the civil war in that country? Joining me in the arena is Oleg Kalugin, a former Major General in the KGB and now a professor at the Center for Counterintelligence and Security Studies here in the United States. He's called Putin, a former subordinate of his in the KGB, a war criminal. And in London is Alexander Nekrassov, a former advisor to the Kremlin and a supporter of Russian airstrikes in Syria. Thanks for joining me in the arena, gentlemen. Oleg Kalugin, you spent decades in the KGB at the very top of Russia's military intelligence apparatus. Moscow says it's in Syria carrying out airstrikes at the invitation of the Syrian government and merely to stop ISIL. Do you buy that?
Well, of course, it's a geopolitical problem primarily. I mean, Islam is, well, in many countries, but in Syria specifically, Russia has a different goal. It's to protect and preserve the current Syrian regime.
And Vladimir Putin, I believe, was one of your subordinates back when you were in the KGB. What do you think he wants to get out of this Syria operation?
Well, it's just to show to the world that Russia is loyal to its allies and will never give up and will fight with the means available to protect the sovereignty and, well, actually the stability in Syria. So that's quite typical of old and current Russian policies.
Alexander Nekrassov, surely Russia is pouring fuel on the flames of the Syrian civil war. More bombs, more war, more conflict.
Well, well, that's a very, very unusual point of view, because if anybody was pouring oil over the conflict in Syria, that would be the West and the allies in the region, because supplying those arms to so-called moderate rebels and then acknowledging themselves that these arms ended up in the hands of IS and other terrorist groups. I mean, that is pouring oil over petrol over fire. But I don't agree with the point of view that this is geopolitical and that Russia is trying to show that it is supporting its ally. Russia is being commonsensical here, to be honest, because first of all, if Assad regime goes down now, at this moment, when the IS forces control half of the country, we will see another Libya.
Hold on, in Syria, the humanitarian crisis dwarfs what happened in Libya, and that's as a direct result of Russia's ally, Bashar al-Assad. All you're doing is doubling down behind a man who has already created a humanitarian crisis in the Middle East. You're propping up one of the world's worst dictators.
Nobody in Russia is saying that Assad should stay forever. The point that President Putin has made several times, and other Russian officials, it's not a good time at the moment to replace the government and the leader. The point is this: Russia is defending its national interests as well, because IS is not only threatening Europe and America and the Middle East, it is threatening Russia. It is threatening Russia in a big way. There are thousands of Russian citizens of Muslim origin who have gone to fight in Syria and have gone to fight in Iraq. Some of them have returned back. They pose a danger, just like they pose a danger in Europe. You have to do something about it. You have to destroy these monsters.
You have to do something about it.
And unfortunately,
Oleg Kalugin wants to come in. Hold on, Oleg.
Well,
after a year of
hold on, Alexander. Let Oleg come back in.
Well, any military moves by Russia today are viewed as dangerous to world peace. And it's quite fortunate, so far at least, that the United States or NATO countries were not involved in the Syrian conflict, but you never rule out the possibility. Then it will be truly a confrontation of the two worlds, just perhaps worse than in the Cold War period.
From the Syrian airstrikes could escalate into something between the United States and Russia. Right. Alexander, you're risking World War III here with these Syrian airstrikes, says Oleg.
Listen, when you start bombing anywhere, there are a lot of risks. and the Russian military and President Putin and everybody else in Russia understands there are risks. But you have to take risks sometimes when you see what is going on the ground. We have Libya as an example. Syria is being turned into another Libya.
Today, the Assad regime is held responsible for at least something like 100,000 civilian deaths. Given Assad is the biggest recruiting sergeant for ISIL, by propping up Assad, you're actually helping ISIL, aren't you?
Well, you know, out of the 200,000 people dead in Syria, half is Assad's troops and his supporters. So, you know, when we hear about 200,000,
but 90% of the civilians, but 90% of the civilians, according to the UN, according to different studies that have been done, have been killed by the Assad regime. Barrel bombs and other such methods, chemical weapons, etc. That's the regime that the Russians are now supporting.
I am making a point that you do not destroy a government completely in a country which is involved in a civil war with one of the most monstrous forces ever to emerge in this century. We've seen it happen in Iraq. And
my point to you is that in the eyes of Syrians, Assad is the major monstrous force, is he not? And you are supporting him. Every time he drops a barrel bomb and kills a bunch of children, it's on Russia, is it not?
No, we're talking about a temporary solution. We're talking about first dealing with IS, then dealing with a diplomatic solution, kicking him out, putting somebody instead of him. Now is not the time to do it. It's as simple as that.
Okay, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for joining me in the arena. That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.